My name is Jesse Wieland. I'm the Associate Director at the Office of National Fellowships. I also have a couple colleagues with me here today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves very quickly.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Garcia-Glockner. I'm the Assistant Director for the Office of National Fellowships.
I'm Keith McCall. I am the Assistant Director of the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards.
And so together, you'll be working with one of us over the next few months if you decide to apply to Fulbright this cycle. And so if you haven't reached out to us to set up a first appointment, please do so sometime in the near future. We're going to have our first deadline on June 1st for first drafts of essays. But again, we can get into all of that later at the end of this meeting to wrap things up, because I would like to turn it over to our amazing panelists that have joined us today to introduce themselves. And so let's just go ahead and get started with the panelists. If you would like to just give us your name, general background, like hometown, what you studied during your time at FSU and where you went for your Fulbright, and maybe include what you're doing currently.
I'll kick it off, y'all. Hey everyone, I am Brian Menard, so my pronouns are he, him. I graduated from FSU spring 2017. I studied psychology and sociology back in the day, but my Fulbright was in Nairobi, Kenya. So I was a Fulbright ETA, English teaching assistant for the 2018 cycle. And if I missed it, my hometown is Northport, Florida, so Gulf side.
Okay, I can go. My name is Charlotte Popolo. I graduated from FSU in spring of 2016. I studied both Spanish and international affairs, and I did my ETA this last year, 2020 to 2021, in Spain, in the Canary Islands. And I'm from Jacksonville, Florida.
Duval.
Duval. I currently still live in Spain, so it's dark out and I have interesting lighting, so excuse the background difficulties, but yeah, we are 5 hours ahead here.
And continuing our journey back through time, my name is Caitlin. I am from Deltona, Florida. I graduated in 2009 with a degree in political science and interdisciplinary social sciences, and did a year of Fulbright ETA in Rio Negro, Colombia I did not graduate in 2009, I graduated in 2013, excuse me, from 2013 to 2014. And then I was asked to stand as a senior ETA to supervise incoming ETAs in Cali, Colombia from 2014 to 2015. And I find myself right next door in Brazil at this time.
Cool. So thank you all for joining us today. How did you start going through sort of narrowing down? So as you were applying for the ETA opportunity, how did you decide on the ETA versus maybe the study award? And then also, how did you narrow down to that country specific?
I'll happily start again. I feel like I had, in my perspective, an interesting kind of process in deciding Fulbright. So back when I was maybe a first or second year student, I'd heard about I think it's for second year students, like the UK study program. And I think that was my first exposure to what Fulbright was, or an opportunity. And I remember, I think, starting that application process a little bit later, but thinking, okay, how do I even choose among the different universities like Glasgow, or like being somewhere maybe like directly in London and whatnot for an opportunity. And that ended up not working out like in the long run. But with that was like getting that initial exposure, working with another advisor in ONF. And by the time my junior year came around, I thought, well, you know, this fellowship or this like name is familiar enough. I do want to do a fellowship, like still have some kind of door into education, because by that point in my undergrad career, I figured I wanted to be an educator of some kind. I just wasn't sure if it was K through 12, higher education, what that route might look like. And so that really helped me clarify I was going to be doing the English teaching assistantship process as opposed to doing any kind of scholar study or any some of the more niche awards that they have, like the National Geographic or whatnot. But then I remember from there, even talking with some other folks who were applying, the ways that we would try to finesse this application and be clever as far as, okay, which country gets like the least number of applicants or which countries don't require language or whatnot, trying to be clever with it. And I do not advise y'all do that. I'm sure you hear that advice anyway, but don't do that. Even if it somehow, some way did work out, I'm not sure what your experience would look like by the time you're in the country, especially if you don't have that kind of tie-in. But for that cycle, when I was applying heading into my senior year, I had then decided I wanted to apply to Nairobi, Kenya, but that application process ended up not working out. And so as a post-grad, I reapplied, same country, same destination, because in my research in looking at countries and reflecting on my own experience, I recognized a lot of what I wanted to do was working in more collectivist culture, similar to what I was finding, looking at what Kenya was looking for at the time. Similarly, their description for ETA specifically mentioned opportunities working maybe in post-secondary or opportunities working like more higher education realm, which is what I was choosing to study for my for my master's degree once I graduated. And so really finding not just a cultural connection, but also the description and connection of what they're looking for at ETA has really helped me narrow out. And of course, it helped that they didn't have a language requirement, because of the languages that I can speak, none of them are fluent enough for me to be able to go to Spain. Shout out Charlotte. I know that can be competitive, or even Colombia, right? But all of those things play into helping you figure out, all right, like what is it about you that may work as a scholar or as an ETA, but then also what is it about that country that makes sense, and how you kind of make that match for yourself as you're thinking about the destination, but then also writing it out in the application process.
I have a little clapping for Brian, because that point about trying to game the system with statistics may work for some folks. I remember when I was going to Colombia, they were expanding their program, and that was something that was appealing to a lot of people. And it got to a point where we were in Bogota during our orientation, and we went around the room and explained why we chose Colombia. And there was one guy who raised his hand and he said, "The odds." And let me tell you, his grant did not last 3 months. It was really, you know, it's challenging in that kind of a context. For me, something that was really attractive for me about Colombia was, one, the language. I was a Spanish speaker at that point. Two, I had been working in the greater Big Bend region in English education programs for migrant workers and international students for 4 years at that point. And so the fact that in Colombia you're teaching at a university level rather than K through 12 was something that also really appealed to me. I haven't had a lot of experience with early childhood education, and so working with adults felt like a much more comfortable environment for me. And third is that the Columbia program had a mandatory community service requirement, or community service project development requirement. And I felt that that really matched my experience at FSU and the values that I had developed through service scholars and other types of involvement. So that was something that really attracted me to that program. But definitely echoing Brian's statements, if you're going in for the math, you're not going to have a good time.
I will only say I agree with, like, there's no way to disagree. I remember coming across a lot of people, when you talk to them about Fulbright, will bring up like the Reddit page, which I use with caution, is all I can say. And it's really important to have a connection, something other than like the odds in your favor. Like if you don't want to do, like if you don't have something calling you to the position that you're applying for, it's not, everyone's going to be able to tell. And I picked mine. I picked Spain primarily because I narrowed it down to, I wanted to be in a Spanish speaking country. I studied Spanish at FSU, and I really, before I did anything else, I wanted to be able to have some fluency in Spanish. And then I remember deciding between Costa Rica and Spain, because I had studied abroad in Costa Rica through FSU and loved it. But at Costa Rica at the time only had 2 slots, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to be in a rural community in Costa Rica with potentially 1 other Fulbrighter, or in Spain, which had 220 at the time. And Spain also has a robust program that already exists outside of Fulbright for English teaching assistants. So those were all factors. But I remember my host family in Costa Rica telling me, if you haven't been to Spain, you have to go. And like, that was a little piece of my heart that was in the game.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that perspective, and I also appreciate Charlotte mentioning that that Reddit thread, because I had another student that also used Slack or something like that. And if your personality is anything like mine, where you feed off the energy of others, like Charlotte said, use with caution, because it can be anyways. But we'll talk about that more maybe in a one-on-one meeting, or as we get more into the process. But the next question that I want to ask all of you is something that we get from our students all the time. Is they're all challenged in different ways in approaching just the application process. And oftentimes just starting can be very difficult. But can you reflect a little bit on when you approached the application for the first time? What was it that really challenged you? And how did you try meeting that challenge?
I have thoughts, and I remember actually sitting down with advisors was really helpful for this. So I think maybe it was my sophomore year. I hadn't done as much reflecting on undergrad experience like that early on, but I remember sitting down with an advisor that asked me to describe myself in like 10 seconds, like go, like immediately, like almost as if like a little graphic, like there was a guillotine on me. Like these are my last words. And I was just like, I don't know what, like, I don't know. I don't think this pressure works for me. Like, I don't think I can respond that way, but it was a good kind of like charge for me to think about. We had a good relationship, thankfully. They weren't that scary, but like good charge for me to think about, okay, like what is it about myself, about my experience, about what I want, or what I've done so far that prepares me for this experience, for this opportunity? And I think that's like a really big, hard question to ask, not only for that reflective piece of what have you done before, but also with all those experiences, like where will that take you? What do you want to do with this experience? And again, like how does Fulbright prepare you for that? And then even with that, it's one thing to really try to like think through that abstract bit of, all right, what have I studied? What have I done? Like, what is it about education? What is it about this country, my cultural experiences? If I've been abroad or not, how do you fit all of that onto a piece of paper? And then again, how do you, as you try to like connect those thoughts, communicate what can I do with this opportunity? Because again, to Sean's point earlier, if you are applying for a country that is maybe 1 to 3 applicants, a lot of those other folks are trying to share that same story, and yours might absolutely be compelling, but of course so are theirs. And so the best, I think, strategy that I ended up coming up with, and I have experience, I've applied to this thing like 3 times now, so I'm a little biased, but a lot of what worked for me was just to think through different, I guess, segments of like my experience, my story, and try to come up with a narrative of those. So one of the things that I talked through was my experience as a Haitian American growing up in Miami, Florida, and like making community as a first generation American, a Haitian American in the States, and connecting back to my family in that way. And so I thought through, how do I communicate some of the challenges there, some of the story there, and how language like really helped me bridge like those cultural gaps. And that was one experience that I really had to like kind of process some storytelling with. And then from there, another experience was also, what about my what's it called, education really prepares me for wanting to kind of reciprocate that and like be an educator myself, and how do I talk through my experience at Florida State or throughout, you know, K through 12, and what I can do with that long term as an educator. And then from there, in my case, it worked out where I start noticing like those connections, those consistent themes, and I can like kind of put those like little separate stories, narratives together and kind of make an overarching, I guess, like personal statement. Unless you are really successful in this way as a writer, overthinking like each individual word, paragraph, the grammar pieces, I recommend saving that to the end. I think in both my submissions, even as a finalist, sometimes I go back and laugh, looking at all the grammar like typos I did have in like my final essay that was still approved, and think about I poured over that so many times. I remember, to motivate myself, I was saving like draft number 19, draft number 20, just like think through like how much I've been writing. And even then, like I still had like those errors. And so for a lot of what I experienced and what a lot of I've heard from other applicants, it's really about how do you tell that story and how do you communicate who you are on that piece of paper, as opposed to how perfect the grammar is. Ironically, as an English teacher, you want to improve that at some point before or during your 9-month grant, but a bulk of it is really being able to tell that story and think through what that process looks like for you.
I think there's an element in many applications where you're essentially explaining three things. Who are you? Why do you want to go? Why do they want you there? And I think that third point is something that folks often miss. You can be filled with, as a highly energetic person, I'm so filled with enthusiasm, but all of my enthusiasm doesn't mean anything if I don't have experiences and a temperament to be able to help an existent structure on the ground. So much like Brian mentioned, if you're having a hard time distilling your narratives or, smushing everything that you are into these really small word counts, just remember, it's not that you get to experience a community for a year. A community, in a turn of phrase, has to experience you for a year. Why are you as a person, why are you the right choice to make that an enjoyable, meaningful experience for the folks that you're going to be working with on the ground? So just please keep that in mind. Who are you? Why do you want to go? But most importantly, why do they want you to go there?
I really like that three-part structure. I think that makes a lot of sense. And to Brian's point, like picking a narrative, I felt like was the hardest part of starting. And I remember looking at writing my first draft and being so stressed about it and submitting it, and Jesse being the nicest person, saying in the nicest way, like, no, like, why don't we try again? Like, I like the energy, but can you rewrite it? And pick like the hardest part for me, I felt like, was picking, like, we're all such multidimensional people with lots of interests and experiences and things that like call us and things that we want to bring the world and that we want to show Fulbright, and we want to tell them that this is why I'm perfect and this is why you want me and this is why I want you, and like, but you have to fit it into such a small number of words and small amount of space that it's, for me, I thought that it was most helpful to like just pick a lane at the end of the day, like put as many compelling things that thematically tie together, and there are going to be wonderful parts of you that Fulbright will never get to see in the essay. So, and accepting that like made my life easier in a subversive way. Yes.
Yeah, those are all really excellent points. And there are some narratives that don't work, like Charlotte said, purely because you can't fit it in the space that you're given. And so that's why, as advisors, we really try to work with you to find the best place to fit everything, not just in the 2 major essays, but there are also 3 additional short essays that we talk about later on in the application process. But Bonnie, I'll turn it over to you for the next question.
Sure. So yeah, you go through this process of the application and getting through all of that. You get that selection email, you have that big wait, and then you have to transition to a new country. So how do you go about sort of settling into that host country's culture? You know, what was familiar maybe for you? What challenged you the most? How did you build that community? What tips do you have for people doing that?
I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of the collectivist approach to community in East Africa and Kenya specifically was why I applied to that country for an ETA. And a lot of what I would say, I think Caitlin mentioned this with the person who kind of applied based on odds. A lot of what really kept me grounded in moments too when I struggled during my ETA was community, and whether that was connecting back to folks who I had close relationships back in the States, or even like a community I got to build at my host school or even in local neighborhood was really what kept me grounded. And a lot of that really comes down to not finding ways and I think make yourself uncomfortable, but it goes back to what Kelly had mentioned about like the community experiences as you write. And so another big piece for me, bless undergrad me, I think when I was applying, I was like, oh, as a Black man, like I want to be somewhere where all the folks are Black, like let me go to Kenya, right? And it hadn't hit me. I'd not traveled abroad, at least like a majority Black country either, and appreciated how Blackness is experienced in so many different ways, right? And so like my experience being Black in the States or even in Haiti, super different from what it's like in Kenya. And so even being out there, not necessarily feeling like I got to connect the community in the same ways, I had to make sure that I was being intentional and mindful of how I'd go out of my way to really experience like a lot of what my friends were experiencing, a lot of my colleagues as instructors were experiencing. And so being on the school campus and like staying for meals, getting to coach sports and whatnot in the local community, getting to connect with neighbors about meals. A lot of the surrounding community was Muslim as well. And so getting to celebrate over holidays and like food and whatnot, finding those ways to really immerse yourself in that experience made it so much easier to actually acclimate, get to learn, even though Kiswahili was not a required language for me as an applicant. For folks where a country, the language is of course required, you have to speak it relatively well or fluently, but even if it's not required in your country, if a lot of folks do speak a certain language, even making that effort yourself to like get to learn and get to connect was really important. I was very lucky. The embassy person that I had, or in point of contact that we had for my fellowship year, was also based in Nairobi and had been able to go to our pre-departure orientation and was very communicative over the course of our waiting period, even before we began. And I know that's not the case for everyone, but what's been really nice, for all the flaws that the Fulbright Reddit group or those Slack groups have, if you're able to connect with ETAs who've been out and are kind of accessible for communication, I recommend doing that. Just kind of get as much as you can to learn more about the culture, get a good idea of like maybe what to expect, connect more with the larger Fulbright community. I know that there's something called Fulbright Noir, which is more prevalent, I believe, on Instagram, but they're on socials as well, of other students of color who've gone out and completed Fulbright ETAs or research, which has been really cool to connect to kind of fellowship, like community of color for myself, which is really cool. Just like I can learn about experiences like other Fulbrighters. And if you have that as an outlet to be able to just learn about the general experience or specifically about the in-country experience, just to find different ways to connect more, that'll make it help you prepare a little bit better before you get out, but also just make it so much easier for you to immerse and ingrain in the community, so that 9 months, as short as it is, also is a long time to not really be part of the experience. And you miss out in so many different ways if you aren't able to like immerse fully.
I wholly agree with what Brian shared. I think that community can come in 3 different aspects. One, during the waiting period, oh my gosh, good luck. But I mean, for the most part, I think students are in their senior year, there's a lot going on. I know I was applying for the Wrangell or the Pickering undergraduate program. I was looking at grad school. I was trying to get my TOEFL certification. I was looking at a lot of different things. But I remember just my heart wasn't in it, like writing all these grad school applications. I'm like, my God, the Fulbright better come through. I did not want to go. I wasn't ready for grad school. And so I did lean on my community in that time. I focused on my craft. I increased the amount of time I was doing English language instruction. I got my TOEFL certification. And so I knew that these were things that would make me better on the ground if I was chosen. And if I weren't chosen, I would also have these skills to fall back on and a way to keep doing that same kind of work in the community I was already in. The other point on community, once you arrive, on the other side of the looking glass, as a proud bureaucrat of the State Department, we know that your positions are not always finalized. My location in country was changed 3 times before I arrived. That can happen for myriad reasons, but please understand that you are applying to a country, not a city. You're applying to a country, not a school. So if you really thought you were going to be shiki in Bogota and you end up in a rural farm community in the swamp, you did sign up for this. You signed up for this so hard. You wrote several essays signing up for this. You signed several forms signing up for this. You gave your consent 19,000 times asking for this. A phrase that we heard, to be fair, at that time in the 2013 to 2015 window was immediately before the peace accords. And so there were concerns about physical security in the country at the time. And one Fulbrighter was airing some grievances about a difficult time. And the in-country director at that time, I remember saying, you asked for this. You have no right to be outraged and indignant for an experience that you repeatedly asked to participate in. And while I thought that was a little harsh, I mean, right, that's not exactly a trauma-informed approach to dealing with someone having a difficult transition. I recommend building and relying on the community that you have asked so many times repeatedly to be placed in. I experienced some political unrest, some physical violence issues during my placement, and it was by building ties with the community that I was placed in, I was able to overcome those in a physical and emotional way. I ended up having a bit of minor surgeries, incapacitated for about 3 months. And it was because the community that I made that still brought up my French homework for me and sent out my English materials for my other students, that brought me food, that helped make my world go round during that time. That really is what makes the experience. And it's the reason I was so eager to serve for a second year. And in terms of, so we have before, while you're waiting, while you're there, and then when you return. Throughout the country and around the world, there are different Fulbright boards and Fulbright committees. I served on the Greater New York City Metropolitan Area Fulbright Committee for about 2.5 years. And that was also a really special way to be able to see incoming Fulbrighters studying at NYU, Columbia, at a bunch of different schools, to share with their experience. Every year we had a reception at the US mission to the UN. And it was a really neat way to be able to engage in the enthusiasm and creativity and expertise that you get to during your very special grant period. And I highly recommend for folks who are in the application process, who want to hear a little bit more from folks who had that experience, or after you come back from your experience and you want to reconnect with similar-minded people, highly recommend finding your local branch to join.
I will add and say that my grant location was changed as well, just within the Canary Islands, because Spain, I believe Spain has you apply for a region because they have such a robust English teaching assistant system that's already in place, and Fulbright is a small part of that, but a small, like, prestigious part of it. So yes, to Caitlin's point, you are signing up for something, for a category of jobs or a category of placements, and to find community. I had a particularly irregular year because my grant was started in 2020, but they deferred it to January of 2021. So my Fulbright grant was only 5 months. And it was also before a vaccine. And I never saw most of my kids without a mask, like most of the students that I taught, because I taught in primary school. And finding community was particularly hard for a lot of Fulbrighters for that year. But I think things that stood out, and because it was something we talked about amongst ourselves a lot. The people who spoke Spanish, who made an effort to speak Spanish, whatever the host language is, it plays a big, big role. Besides making an effort to speak the language, it was really nice to have a community of other Fulbrighters to fall back on and to live with in a time when I wasn't sure that any Spanish roommates, how, like, navigating a whole new housing market and a new, like, I had a side project that I was really excited to do, but none of the nonprofits were open during the time because of COVID. So, but I had a great, great, great year, so much so that I wanted to stay another year. So even if community doesn't at first appear, it is a constant process.
So I have one more quick question before I want to turn it over so the attendees can ask questions that they have, and we can always bring it back at the end with some closing remarks. But something that the attendees may not be aware of is that some ETA placements, you are in the classroom 40 hours a week. That is what you're doing. You are there as an educator, and others will have what is phrased as a supplemental project. And so because I think Caitlin, I believe you did, Brian, you did as well. And I think Charlie, you said that you were unable to, but if you had to write about your supplemental project in the essays, what did you choose to do? How did you settle on that? And what did that look like in practice?
In my experience, and granted that things I believe have changed, we were not working 40 hours a week, we were working 30 hours a week. It's a much easier time, especially compared to the French, who were working 12. I'd like to bring that up with someone. I think that a lot of my cohort, both of my cohorts, folks came in with a strong idea of what they hoped to do. However, once you hit the ground, you have that stipend that your university or your school has very strong ideas how they want to spend it, how they want you to allocate your time. I had hoped to do women's empowerment programs, but my boss was really hoping that I would volunteer with a partner school that they had. One of their subs had recently been dismissed. However, I think that by pairing with other educational institutions, and again, by networking within your community, you have the opportunity to do some really neat things. I was able to join a research project on Indigenous rights in Southern Colombia, and that was absolutely fantastic. Got some published work under my belt, and that was something I never could have imagined. So while I do obviously highly recommend deeply researching the place where you're going and the work that you hope to do, please be flexible with your expectations and with yourself. Give yourself the chance to grow with the environment you land in.
Yeah, that flexibility is incredibly important. If you hadn't, I guess, gauged based off of how their locations had to change. I know I've heard a mix from folks who had applied, even the ETAs that I ended up doing my experience with during 2018 Kenya, as far as folks being very direct about what they might want to do with given resources and whatnot. But once you hit the ground, even if you are in the exact same place that you were told you would go, that you plan to go, so much can change based on the needs of the school, the needs of the students, I was fairly open to doing some kind of programming for students after school, whatever that might look like. And I made sure that was clear in my essay as I was writing. However, once I got to the school, through relationships I built with kind of a mentor English teacher who taught some older students in the secondary school, as well as my own interest in sports, we ended up being able to develop inaugural poetry programs as well as after school sports programs to do that. And so it was a good blend of what I selfishly kind of wanted to do, but also what I could do with a mentor at the time, as well as like what the students needed. And those are really important for y'all to figure out as well in your own experience. I worked with many students who, or many other Fulbright ETAs who were placed in different regions in sub-Saharan Africa, and they all had ranging interests as far as developing libraries, being able to do women's empowerment groups and whatnot. And then when they get to a school, maybe the instructors, maybe the administration expects them to be in the classroom far more than some of those more project or activity-oriented kind of assignments. And so a lot of that is a mix of everything that's been discussed as far as you generally sign up to go to the country and kind of support a school or whatnot, with also you advocating for yourself as far as what makes sense for your capacity. If you can't do that 40 hours, that's not in your Fulbright contract anyway. And so you have to be able to be mindful of how to balance that out. Doing something that's right for the students as well as what's right for yourself, right? I ended up, there were some students in my program who didn't plan to, but when they got to their school in South Africa, they recognized a big need for a library, and they were able to fundraise with folks in country as well as back home to put all that together. And so definitely recommend being open to wherever possible, maybe doing more than just the classroom piece, because you find that, especially if you can work maybe like the French and do 12 hours or so, you will have a lot of wiggle room that you might want to do something different with. And so figuring out how that can maybe tie into supporting the school, but also your own interests as far as, again, blending those together. But a lot of it does require you to be flexible, because you really won't know the whole situation until you're on the ground.
Absolutely. Retweet. I don't think anyone's plans in 2020 for the grant year of 2020 to 2021 went as planned. And also I remember my direct communication with all of the Fulbrighters who had been on my island the year before. All of their stories were, well, we didn't get to finish our side projects because it was March of 2020 and we had to go home. And it was like, so the flexible from the beginning to the end. I had friends who really, really were committed to the idea of a community garden or a school garden, and that they get to the school and the school's like, oh, we already have a garden. Fulbright does give you a little bit of time to brainstorm once you're on the ground again, like once you're on the ground in the first place, but to brainstorm again and say, okay, well, now given the materials that you do have and the resources and the people that you're in contact with and the organizations that are maybe on your island or maybe not on your island, like, let's regroup, and you can make another compelling argument. So yeah, I think in the application space, being able to articulate something that it conveys your interests and your flexibility, and that makes your application stronger as a whole and is feasible, but you don't have to count on it being like, it's not set in stone by any means. So yeah.
And so I would love to turn it over to some of our attendees to ask any questions that they may have. But of course, we have plenty of other questions that we could ask our wonderful panelists as well. But feel free to type in the chat if that's easier, or feel free to unmute yourself, but we'd love to hear from you. Okay, we do have a question for Charlotte. For Spain grants, is it based on your selection of region, or will the region be selected for you?
When I applied, I'm only familiar with as of a couple of years ago, but when I applied, I selected the region. So I made my applications specific to the Canary Islands.
That has not changed. And so an important point to make is that when you go onto Fulbright's website and you find the country that you're applying for, you will keep that tab, or you should keep that tab open on your for the next like 4 months, you know, until you hit submit. Because for Spain specifically, at the very bottom of their page, it says in the first line of your statement of grant purpose, if you do not say where you want to be placed, the age of the students that you want to be working with, you know, whatever else, your application will not be considered. That's a very important line to make sure that you are aware of. But obviously, that is a very hyper-specific example. But yes, most countries, to Caitlin's point, you need to be adaptable to anything. But in like Taiwan, Spain, and a few other countries, you do have a little bit of leverage to say, this is where I would like to be.
And to one point to that is that Spain, when I applied, had 2 regions that were primary education. And there are like 10 regions or something. I don't really know. There's a bunch. There's at least 7. So there were people that, to the point of being flexible, there were people that applied to La Rioja, which is a wonderful, wonderful wine country. I think it's mountainous and very rural from everything that I've heard, and landlocked and not that far from Madrid in the grand scheme of things. And that because they made their application really interested in primary education, that because of the reshuffling, they were put on the Canary Islands. So like, that's the sort of reshuffling that isn't uncommon.
We have another question from Lila, who asks, does it help to have a personal connection to the country that you apply to? They'd like to apply for France because of their interest in the culture, but they are not French themselves.
I would like to answer this one with my whole chest. You do not have to be from that country. In fact, please, one of the things with Fulbright is it wants to give an opportunity to someone go to where they have never been. There were 2 individuals within my first cohort who had all these like lovely essays for superfluous reasons, but wanted to go to Columbia because they had Colombian partners. They had Colombian romantic partners at the time of application. However, one ended up leaving the program, and another, I want to say, has been happily living in Argentina with her partner ever since. It could go either way. Period, full stop. I would highly recommend applying to a place in which you have a genuine, authentic, academic or creative or linguistic or even culinary interest in what is going on, and in the education of individuals, be it children, be it university students from that place. Thank you so much for asking this question, Lila. I didn't realize how anxious I was to answer it. Please find an anchor. Why would it be beneficial for them to have you, not just for you to go there? So thank you for that excellent question, Lila.
At least in the years that I've been working with Fulbright applicants, some of the most compelling applications have come from students that have never been to the countries that they are applying to, but they have done their research. They've reached out to people who have had those experiences. They've found the literature or literally just gone through Google and read current event, but they have looked into why this is a good fit for them. So yes, you do. But on the other end of that spectrum, I've had students that have very intimate research projects and experience in that country that it's like, this is why I need to go back. And so wherever you fall in that spectrum, you can submit a compelling application. Other questions? And again, feel free to keep using the chat or feel free to unmute yourself if you would like. So from Alicia, we have, what characteristics or qualities should we research or look into for when deciding on a country?
In my second year, I briefly worked on the last phase of the selection committee. So as you know, you have an internal selection process, then that's forwarded to state, and then state does it at post. Something that we look for is how tied is this characteristic or this research topic tied to this country. For example, if you were interested in, to go back to the wine country example, if you were interested in the history of phenology in the Iberian Peninsula, then yes, Spain would be an excellent place. However, if you are interested in dance and cultural expressions of dance, and your entire essay is just about the way that dance is embedded in culture and in linguistics, and you even have everywhere has dance. Every country has dance. Every people have a dance. Again, something that's specific, that is tied to that place, or to that country, or to an ethnicity, a nationality, a people within that country. I couldn't encourage you enough to be specific.
Yeah, I would say aside from that general interest in the country itself, its history, its culture, and whatnot, from what I've seen so far, and I had to go back and look up the country profile for ETAs for Kenya, a lot of that information is already provided to y'all as far as what they are looking for in their applicants. So they will explicitly say, these are the kind of schools we would like y'all to work in. These are maybe the qualifications, experiences. If there might be some kind of supplemental project in dance or in writing or in theater or something like that, they'll explicitly mention those things. And so as you review those tabs that you have open for some time, like look at what stands out to you in your experience or what is interesting to you, hone in on those where you can, especially if you're looking for those elements anyway of your application to make it more compelling. If that connection is already there from what you're seeing in your own experience, cling onto those, or like think about those a little bit more to really showcase the why this country, kind of why now situation. But I want to say with that, I mean, you'll work with your advisors who are so knowledgeable and like can support with this, but that is not, in my opinion, a losing formula. Like they're providing you a profile of what they're looking for. Work with that to start, and then from there, like, connect with your advisors as far as, hey, like, what do you feel like is still missing based on what you've seen from other applicants, especially if they've been able to work with applicants going to those specific countries, and go from there.
Sorry. No, go ahead, Charlotte.
I'll just here to reiterate that like a specific claim to something that you're interested in, to something else that ties into like what you'd like to do next, or an idea of like just making a really specific claim worked out well for me. I took a class on I was taking a class in a Spanish class with Dr. Gomez, and we studied the politics of Spain and Spanish immigration and Spanish immigration policy at the time. It had just come out in a Pew Research poll that Spain had the most friendly public opinion of immigrants and of refugees of across Europe. And so that was the basis of my claim for why I wanted to study in Spain, or why I wanted to be an ETA in Spain, and used it as a way to describe how when I came back to the United States, my plan was to attend law school and work in immigration law. And I felt like this was a specific, and like this was an experience that I could learn from a community and from working at a nonprofit that did legal affairs. And that was my pitch as an example, but yes.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, Charlotte. I was only going to say that just as advisors, we're here to help guide the ideas that you have. We can push you in a few different directions. We can help you be more specific, but it really is up to all of you to find whatever that hook is. And I think Brian, Charlotte, Caitlin, they all did an excellent job of that when they applied. But I've seen students that have started with applications that it's like, I want to play Jeopardy in my classroom, which is awful. Please never use that. But that has evolved into very compelling, very interesting ideas. So it doesn't matter where you start, as long as you put in the effort and time to find how to make it specific and compelling. Mia has a question and says, this is more of a personal question, but how would you recommend keeping expectations realistic while still remaining hopeful? Is there anything you did or reminded yourself of throughout the application process to help ease some of the anxiety? That's a really great question. Thank you, Mia.
I think we might have all like found our own anchors, our own like motivators, like to sustain ourselves through the process. Because like I mentioned for myself, like by the time I started my successful Fulbright application, I'd already been burned a couple of times, and I was just like, almost like in my head, like, dude, like the Fulbright Association is gonna love this one. They have to, like, I absolutely, like, they must, because that also helped me stay motivated, even like renumbering my drafts and whatnot. But I think this is hard to like it's very personal. It depends on like what works for you. I was comfortable with getting a lot of feedback from different perspectives, folks who like had international experiences, folks who had like classroom instruction experience and whatnot, the advisors, of course, like making sure that I would schedule those appointments, get those appointments, because a lot of times like that was that time for me to like focus on my writing, and it was really helpful for me to work that way. But it is such a long, grueling in a lot of ways process. I mean, even after you submit, like you're waiting, sitting in limbo for months on end. A lot of it is like wait and go, wait and see. And I was figuring out at the time, do I go to grad school, or do I just say like, no, I'll just wait to see if like they give me a notification, right? Like it is a lot of investment. And so you really have to commit and like be comfortable with that process. But what I would recommend, and this worked for me as far as like giving me peace in the application process, was not to focus so much on the competitiveness of it and focus so much on all who are applying, like your odds or anything like that. Just for me, it worked really well to just put words to paper, go back to it and see if like I was comfortable with the story that I'd shared, if this made sense on my experience, if this was true to who I was. And as frustrating as it is, of course, like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But at the end of the day, I was really proud with, all right, like I put on this sheet, this one pager or so, who is Brian, like what I would bring to this experience and how it'll help me grow. And for me, like that just gave me peace, making sure that as I wrote, that story was true to who I was. And then from there, you submit it, you cross your fingers, right? But that looks so different for so many different folks.
I have a couple more questions because I know we're getting low on time, and there's still a few things that I would love for all of you to touch on. And Mia's question kind of ties into this, and so I'm again really glad that she asked this. But could you quickly touch on, just while you were working on or completing the Fulbright application, what else were you doing during your senior year, or applying to, or even if in Brian's case you were applying as an alumnus, like what, and Bonnie makes fun of me all the time for saying this, but what else were you doing so you didn't put all of your eggs into one Fulbright basket?
At the time, I was doing the second half of the social science scholar program. That had just started, and so we were working on a lot of those kinks, since it was a very involved return semester. I was interning at Catholic Charities because DACA had just come out, and Catholic Charities provided the only at-cost DACA service provision. However, the only attorney they had on staff did not speak Spanish. So we were doing legal clinics and things like that. I did a lot of, I really enhanced my commitment to English education for migrant workers. And I thought that that was something that both fulfilled me, took my mind off of the application process, but also should I be chosen, would have only strengthened my work once I got to host country. And I was messaging me in the chat. I was just nervous. I was just anxious. I looked at grad school. I made solid grad school plans. So I had a strong plan B, even if I didn't want to do it. It was there. It was there to comfort me. But I just focused on my existent interests and things that would either make me a better ETA or would help me in my job search if it didn't pan out.
I will also ditto that motion that I was just very anxious. I don't have a lot of advice for that question. But I decided during my last semester, while I was waiting to hear back from Fulbright, that I was interested in being an English teacher in Spain, regardless of whether I got Fulbright or not. And so I applied for the Spanish government program called NowCap, which is on the ground. It's very similar. It's very similar to Fulbright English teaching assistants. You do get paid less and you do not get the same prestige. And that's currently the job that I have now in Spain. But it allowed me to stay another year in the Canary Islands and to continue teaching in a community that I love. So there's a place for that too. But that was my coping mechanism, was my plan B. I remember saying, I'm going to Spain or I'm going to Spain. Like, nobody better try and convince me otherwise. I mean, a pandemic did get in the way, but I did make it to Spain.
I also want to share, my first year, we had a guy who was like, yeah, I was applying with my best friend. I got it, he didn't. That friend showed up 2 months in and was like, yeah, I still really want to teach English in Colombia. And I'm like, well, I will not report you to migration authorities, but good luck. And he ended up staying for quite a while. I remember I saw this guy everywhere. I saw him in my second year too. So listen, like, just because a program may not facilitate it for you, you can still do this. You are still perfectly capable of applying to school. I don't know if folks are still using Indeed. Indeed is a great way to find volunteer or English education or other inspirational opportunities. Highly recommend. Found my first big girl job after coming back from Fulbright with Indeed. And yeah, don't let Fulbright rejection stop you from engaging in the work that was so meaningful to you when you're writing this application.
Could all of you very quickly tell me two things? What did you wish that you knew sooner when you were going through the application process or prior to getting to the country? And second, what was your most memorable moment from your time in country? I know that's a loaded question. You may have a few, so it can give you a little bit of time to think, but what do you wish you had known sooner? And what was the most memorable moment from your experience with Fulbright?
The first thing is that a grant is not a prize. A prize is something you get after you've done a good job. A grant is something you get when you promise to do good work. You receive your grant and there's an expectation that you will be the person you said you were in that application, that you will bring the enthusiasm that you expressed in that application, that you will do the work you expressed interest in doing in that application, that you will build the community that we're talking about right now that you praised during that application. I cannot emphasize that enough. We had some folks both years who had a very hard time, who maybe compared it to a study abroad experience, where this is a little different. You need to find your own housing, you need to manage your own money, you need to sort out your own visa. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the idea because there's so much praise and there's so much esteem around it. And for memorable, gosh, I mean, there are 1,001 memories, but I think something that I'll never forget, and Jesse, please don't get me in trouble, I'm sorry, this is what comes to mind, is that relatedly, this is also a job. This is not you engaging with a really fun English program coordinator. This is a job. I had a French roommate with the Alliance Française, and she did not meet work expectations. Treated the program as a prize, and unfortunately was separated from the program and sent packing. I remember that's something that really shocked me because it really brought into balance the counterbalance to these expectations that if you do not meet them, the school will not wish to work with you. You may be sent home. I don't say that to scare you, but I do remember that that had an impact on me as well as my British Council colleagues. That's something that really made us look at our work a second time, look at the way that we were engaging in the classroom, look at the way we were engaging with other staff. And strangely enough, it's something that made us appreciate the program even more. So maybe all of those together, just please keep that in mind, that it's a promise, not just that they will send you there, but that you will be deserving of that opportunity to be there.
I really want to follow up on that because yes, Caitlin, that was beautiful. For my experience with applying to Kenya, I'd gotten my semifinalist notification, I believe in January of 2017, and then was finally alerted on finalist status in May of that year, but didn't begin until January 2018. And so you ride through very quickly that high and excitement of, oh my God, like I received Fulbright very quickly. And then what do you do with the rest of that time? And it's so important for you to like recognize and appreciate, okay, you have that status, you are a finalist, you receive this grant, you now have to prepare because you are accountable for a student's education. And I think that really hit when I got in country and I noticed how big even testing was, and working at a really competitive private school of all boys, and connecting with a lot of teachers about, you know, just preparing them per term and also like the national testing. It really hit on me how there wasn't necessarily, in my experience, too much accountability, but I put a lot on it myself because if I did not do a good job, if I did not prepare these students well, what did that mean for their careers, for like their next steps and whatnot? For a lot of these students, they're really competitive, and that was really important to them. And so, you know, when you mentioned earlier, Caitlin, about like TOEFL status, for a lot of y'all, you may not have to get like certain certifications and whatnot, but I implore you to still do your preparation, find those resources where you can. Granted, you don't necessarily know fully what you'll need until you get maybe on ground, until you connect with those host teachers, but prepare as much as you can because you are an instructor, you are an educator, and a lot of students, maybe colleagues, instructors, will be relying on you to kind of meet that role. I think a memorable experience for me as well, being at this all boys private school, was midway through the year as the students had a protest and were really butting heads with, in a nice way, butting heads with the teachers and administration. And it was a good reminder as far as, again, like, this is real life. This is a very real experience for the people you're working with, for the people you're educating. And so as great and as exciting it is, again, riding that high, being a Fulbrighter, you're also, there is you experiencing the world, you experiencing life, you experiencing a different culture. And so you have to also keep that in mind.
What do I wish that I had known sooner? I think as a group, something that I wish that my community of Fulbright ETAs, my grant year, I wish that we had been more on the same page about was that this is not a study abroad experience, and that a lot of the hardships that you experience in a study abroad dynamic can't be resolved in the same way that that you are like so much more independent, and you are in charge of your own visa, and you are in charge of your own housing. And if you have a problem with a teacher, you can talk to Fulbright about it, and Fulbright will help you resolve a problem, but not before you talk to the teacher yourself. and not before you talk to the person above the teacher, and then maybe the person above them too. That it is a job, and it's not a ticket to, it's not just a ticket to a fun part of the world where you get to be a tourist. Like, you are signing up to be part of the community and do work, and hopefully make friends that are not Americans, you know, as hard as that may be when you feel isolated. So, and most memorable, my moments in the classrooms that I had last year, where I showed up not being able to speak very loudly, apparently. Like, I didn't speak loud enough for their standards, especially not having worked in a primary school classroom before. And one of the teachers asked me to buy a microphone. So I did wear like a headset microphone, and I recently brought it to school. We also were wearing masks, so it was hard, like it's hard to project. And I would hear all the teachers say like, you all have to be quiet. Charlotte does not speak loudly enough. And it was very cool, but I did use the microphone for a little bit until I learned how to project.
That's fantastic. I also want to be cognizant of time because we have run a little bit over. And so, Connor, I do see your question, but one thing I want to emphasize is that I think this panel, which I literally put together by like just reaching out via Instagram in a couple instances because I couldn't find old emails, and it was I know I try to use my resources, but all of that to say is that I have, throughout the years that I've worked with Fulbright, I have never encountered a Fulbright recipient or alumnus that hasn't been willing to share their experience, share their time, or share their perspective with students that are interested in applying. And so whether that is through a Florida State alumnus that happens to be a Fulbright alumnus, or whether it's going through Fulbright's website and finding alumni who have gone to the countries that you want to go to, or who have done the award types that you're interested in. I have had students that have just like sent a cold email to someone they've never met before and just like, hey, I think the thing that you did was really cool and I would love to learn more about it. And every time that has been responded to with, would love to set up a Zoom call. Here are my essay drafts. Like, what do you want to know? Like, here are my contacts. And so this really is a community project. But anyways, thank you again to all of our panelists for the taking time out of your day, or in Charlotte's case, very late in the day, to speak with all of us and share your perspectives. Thank you all so much for joining, and it was really a pleasure having all of you. And so Bonnie, myself, and Keith, we can hang out for a few more minutes, just in case you have very technical questions about Fulbright. Bonnie, I saw that you posted the link to our intent to participate in project proposal. That is due June 1st. But if this is your first time hearing about Fulbright and you just saw one of my mass emails that I sent out yesterday, don't let that deadline scare you off. We are willing to work with you. And so when we say first drafts, I did not say good drafts, just ideas, and that is all that you need. But thank you all so much for joining. Like I said, we'll hang out for a little bit longer and answer any questions that you have. But thank you all again for taking the time out of your day.
Thank you. It was our pleasure.
It's so good to see all of you too. It's been so long.
Connor, I will answer your question truthfully. Who truly knows? I wrote this 10 years ago. What did I write for host country engagement? Okay, so at that time, Colombia was divided into 2 regions, Bogota and literally everywhere else. And so you could apply for Bogota or literally everywhere else. And so I remember they described Bogota or the mining country. And I remember just the way that they described it on a website was like so bleak. Think pre-Snow White, Seven Dwarfs, like working in a mine, very upsetting. And I thought, wow, that's for me. And so I talked about my experience working with under-resourced schools in San Salvador and women's empowerment projects. And I think that talking about looking forward to bringing that experience into Colombia. I mean, I also went totally policy nerd, and I researched Colombian education policy. There had just been a new president that had come in 2010. So there was a new education agenda. And so I linked a lot of pieces of my essay into different aspects of that agenda. So even if there's not something really attention grabbing in the country description, i.e. the unnamed mining country, look at what's happening in that country in the news. Look at things that are happening. You are there first and foremost to be an educator of English language. Look at what their education policy looks like. What does English look like on the ground? What's their view of the United States? The State Department does a number of public opinion polls that are publicly accessible, and you can just see, wow, for example, only, I think we suspended our grants to Pakistan, but for example, only 6% of Pakistanis have favorable views of the United States. What does the English teaching space look like in that country? What are things that you can bring to the table there? And this goes on. So I apologize, Connor, that it's not as specific an answer as you may have hoped for. But I just remember doing a lot of research and connecting that to past experiences that I had and experiences that I wanted to realize during that time.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you all so much. We're going to share this recording with everyone else that registered, and I know this is just going to be such a valuable resource. I'll try not to pester y'all too much with emails or, but would love to sometime in the future, whether that's later this year or next year, would love to do something like this again, also as an informal catch up with all of you. But again, thank you. I can't say it enough. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Get some rest for those of you who are about 5 or 6 hours ahead of us. And I'm sure we'll check in soon.
Thank you. I'll see you.
Bye, friends.
Happy trails, happy applications.
Woo.